Political Science 373 Women in Politics class today. The video is going to be a little bit of a review session for your midterm exam, which many of you have seen is posted on Blackboard. The exam consists of 30 multiple choice questions, and it covers the material that we have looked at and considered in the last 6 weeks. So we've covered a lot of things. There's been a lot of reading and watching for you guys to do. But what I tried to do in constructing the questions was look very closely at some of the things that I had either spoken about specifically in some of the early videos, things that came up in your discussion groups, or things that are fairly obvious and straightforward. So even if you're a little bit nervous about this exam, because we've had a lot of material that we've covered, I certainly have not made it a tricky exam. And in fact, many of the questions I think are just quite obvious. That being said, I think it's a good idea, if you have not done the readings, to do so. You have until 11:59 p.m. this Friday, October 17th, to complete the exam. It is not timed. You have as long as you want to take the exam, but you can't open it, close it again, and then start the exam again. You have to complete it once you've started the exam. And there's also no backtracking. So if you've answered a question and moved on, you can't go back and answer it a different way. You can't go back and change your answers. So it sort of forces you to complete the exam in a timely manner. Again, there's only 30 questions, and some of them, I think for most of you, will be quite obvious. But I'm going to go over just real briefly some of the things that you can focus on in an effort to prepare for the exam. One of the things, of course, you can do if you're really nervous is print out the readings and have them handy. That way, when you come across a question, you can simply look it up. There's nothing that says that you can't use your materials to do your very best on this exam. I don't think most of you are going to need to do that, however. Again, I attempted to make the exam pretty straightforward. So recall back from the week of September 1st when we were talking about what science is. There were some basic stories about bias in the history of science regarding the biology of men and women. And the story that I want you to focus on specifically in terms of helping you to do well on the exam is the story about correlation between brain size, intelligence, and then how that was used to justify the position of women in society. So review that part of that chapter. There's a couple of questions on the exam that pertain to that specific story. I didn't put anything on the exam about the philosophy of science in 15 minutes video, so there's no need for you to review that. If you have watched it in the past, that was sufficient for our discussion that week. The next chapter talked about what thinking scientifically entails. That was the chapter that was largely about measurement. It talked about the difference between causation and correlation, as well as the primacy of concepts in what scientific thinking is all about. So this goes back to this whole idea of what science is and what it is not, and some of the mistaken conceptions of science. So those are the things that I want you to review from the week of September 8th, those readings there. I also did not put any questions on the exam from the YouTube video, What is Social Science? So the material on the exam just came from the reading and my video lecture from that week. Regarding the readings from the week of September 15th, that first week where we talked about specific scientific evidence for sex differences, there is a question on the exam from the article, Girl Brain, Boy Brain, from Scientific American, so you'll want to have that handy so you can refer to that. But again, this is pretty straightforward stuff. If you've read those articles, you kind of know what the gist is of the author's argument. And then I have several questions from that chapter 15, Sex and Science, that was printed out in PDF form on Blackboard. So I want you to sort of go back over and think about some of the things that are argued in that particular chapter. Focus specifically on the way in which the different categories that they define gender bias, right? So they talked about various ways in which there can be gender bias in science. And so I want you to focus on that. There's several questions on the exam that hone in on that area. We did not have readings the week of September 22nd. Remember, that was the week that I gave you a break so that many of you could catch up on the readings and do your discussion board posts. For the week of September 29th, recall that we read 2 articles, one from a popular press magazine, The War Against Boys. This talked about the disadvantage of boys in education in the United States, and then the other more scientific argument about stereotype threat and how that impacts girls' and women's perceptions of their ability in STEM fields. And so there's a couple of questions on the exam about those 2 readings. Again, pretty straightforward. I think you'll know if you read the articles what the gist of those arguments are and where those authors are coming from. And so when you see those questions on the exam, I think you'll be fairly clear, for example, on what is meant by stereotype threat. So you can look at the first couple of pages of the Shapiro and Williams article to make sure that you have a refresher on what that means exactly. Then for the week of October 6th, which was last week, recall that you were to have watched the documentary Strong, that short film on identity, and read the article about Women Can't Do It and Men Can't Change, about Marine Corps training. There's a couple of questions about bodies and identity that really kind of hones in on this whole idea of capability. And so these are kind of common sense questions, even though they stem from the readings. This is more something, these questions are aimed at encouraging you to think logically about what the conclusions might be if we were to think about the role of bodies and capability and so forth. I also was really inspired by the discussion this past week on Facebook. Many of you just did an absolutely awesome job bringing all of this material that we've been talking about the last 5 weeks to bear on some really interesting questions. And I so appreciate a lot of your personal experiences that you're bringing into the discussion as well. So kudos to all of you who did such a great job on the Facebook discussion board. When I designed the class, I, of course, was trying to come up with some sort of a proxy for in-class discussion. And even though the Blackboard discussion board perhaps is not the best proxy for in-class discussion, that Facebook group that we had going this last week was really exactly what I had in mind and was hoping for. So thank you so much for doing such a terrific job, and I really appreciate that. So if you have any questions about specific things that you need to think about for the exam, by all means you can email me, but I really am quite honest when I tell you I attempted to make the questions as fair and straightforward as possible, knowing that you have had a lot of readings in the last 6 weeks and there's a lot of things to focus on. But really focus on big ideas and concepts and not about little nitpicky minutia things, because that's really not what the exam is about. And again, you're free to use your materials. You can print those out and have them next to you when you open up the exam and begin it. There's no backtracking. You can't start it and close it, go get a sandwich, and then come back and open it again. You have to do it once you've opened the exam, but you can take as long as you like. So good luck on the exam. I hope all of you do great, and this will give you much confidence going into next week when you need to get that interview assignment in. So I will leave it at that for now. Have a great week, and good luck on your midterm exams. Take care.